because everybody seems to be like anti polls and be like, oh, the polls got it wrong again. We're anti, like, screw the polls. Like, we're not gonna listen ever again, and we're not gonna pay attention to them. Okay, so I'm gonna try to defend that a little bit at some point. What are you thinking? Do you think the polls, like, we should stop looking at the polls and stop trusting the polls?
I was watching this election very closely with Jay Shapiro, so we were talking back and forth. Jay Shapiro is the guy who directed Islam and the Future of Tolerance, the movie. He is a total data geek. So he had these spreadsheets that he shared with me. And in that, he was basically putting in the votes, projected votes by county. He predicted the Pennsylvania vote as it was happening, the margin, pretty accurately. And he looked at, and I also did this, we both sort of looked at 538, Nate Silver's polling site, and how he called every state. He got, right now, if North Carolina goes to Trump and the rest of them go as expected, he got 48 out of the 50 states. He projected them right. Okay, he projected the win.
Using the polls.
Yeah, using the polls. And what he does is he's a poll aggregator, right? He's not a pollster himself. So he correctly called 48 out of the 50 states. He correctly called the election for Biden. The margin that he called for actually fell in a pretty good, the area. They simulated the election 40,000 times, and where it landed was actually a good meaty chunk of the distribution. So the polls that he had, I mean, they were off in terms of the margins in some states, but they were off by around 3 or 4 points when they were off, which is
it's still within what happened is still within the margins of error of the prediction.
No, in some cases it wasn't. Like the congressional elections, there were a lot of mistakes in the congressional elections, but the polling errors that they had were about 3 to 4%, which is the same as polling errors have ever been in history. So that is part of a normal.
I didn't say there's no errors, but I'm just saying is within the margins that they
within the expected. Yeah.
Within the expected margin. So it was so there's that. And also I think a lot of people don't understand there's a difference between doing the polls and interpreting the polls. You could have really, really good polls and analyze it poorly, right? And I think a lot of people look at those analysis of the polls, and the analysis of the polls, people come up with conclusions, and those conclusions end up not coming true, and people are like, oh, the polls were wrong. And the polls were done as good as polls can be done, right? And there's always limitations to what the polls can do, but it's the best thing we have. Like, people are like, I mean, it's still, what happened is still more in line with what the polls were showing than people's guesses, right? Like, people were, if you look at what people's guesses were, it was all over the place. Like, the number of people that thought Trump was going to win, for example. Like, what were you going to go with if you don't go with the polls? The polls, at the end of the day, were a lot closer to what happened than any other model that you're going to, what other tool you were going to use. Right?
I saw a lot of yard signs for Trump in my neighborhood.
Right.
Everybody I'm working with, they're college educated, but they really like Trump.
Right. So here's the thing. Like, people say, like, okay, so here's, for example, what one thing that one of the limitations of the polls that people keep addressing, and the pollsters address this themselves, are the people who are shy Trump supporters, who won't tell you that they're Trump supporters, right? And it seemed like that was also a factor this time. I don't know. I'm not sure how big of a factor it is, but people are saying it was a factor, right?
Not as big as a shy Biden voter, like the quiet, subdued Biden voter. Like, that was actually quite amazing.
Right. But whatever the people, okay, but the shy Biden voter, did they not tell the pollsters? No, the shy Biden voter is different from the Trump Trump voter.
They talk to pollsters, but they don't show up at rallies. Biden barely has.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm talking about, Ellie. I'm talking about the shy Trump voters who don't even tell the pollsters that they're not Trump supporters.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
The shy Biden voters, they still, if you ask them who you're going to vote for, they're going to tell you they're going to vote for Biden. They might not show up at rallies and stuff. Okay, but what I'm saying is, like, the people who do not tell pollsters that they're voting for Trump, Like, what is the goddamn polls are supposed to do with that, right? Like, what do you expect? You want the people who are collecting poll data to just like read people's minds against what they're answering you, right? Like, again, this is the best info. Like, the people who are judging where this election is going to go based on how many people showed up at rallies, or they're like, oh, look how much Biden speaks like this, or who could support Biden if he speaks like this. Like, do you think these were reliable methods? Oh, like, oh, Trump is like, he's like, people, people, psychological analysis, like, oh, people are only voting for Biden because they really hate Trump, and maybe that's not going to be a major motivator election. All of this stuff, all of these analysis that people have based on guesses, based on psychology, none of it will produce the results as good as these polls, as flawed as these polls are, as limited as they are. There's no other methodology that people use that would have given you a closer conclusion to what reality is, even though it's not going to be 100% accurate because of the limitation, because of, like, try Trump voters at all. It is still the best tool we have, and because it will always fall short as predicting the future accurately as much as like a magic crystal ball will, people, every time it falls short, people are going to spread anti-intellectualism. People are going to try to use that as a method. So whatever side you're on, I mean, please do not let people use this as, and like, I mean, I'm glad Trump lost and stuff, right? But I want to now focus on defending data and science and intellectualism, because that's a loss. So we won when it comes to like Trump losing. At least I think we won. I don't know. Maybe you guys disagree. Okay, then you're wrong. But we're losing right now in something of value on all sides, both on Trump supporting side and the Biden supporting side, and people who sat at home side, where it seems like we're losing the battle for intellectualism. Everybody is like, screw data then, I guess. Screw the experts, screw data. And I want to ask them, screw data and go to what? Screw to like your own like guesses and psychological analysis and looking at rally sizes and crap like that? I almost swear. Because if we promote that, then we're gonna lose. We're gonna, intellectualism is losing, and we need to be careful about that. But go on.
And there is a question to be asked. Like, okay, so where the polls got things wrong, like the congressional races, Senate races, House races, what went wrong? What was the polling aggregates? What were the flaws in the polls? But the way to fix that is also through science and data. You have to go through a scientific method, and you have to go through like, proper, you have to do a proper sort of data analytics. You have to look at what you missed. Were you calling people disproportionately on cell phones, live calls? Were you overrepresenting people who answered online? Were you not hitting were you not weighting things properly? Like, for instance, in 2016, one of the things that they corrected for is that they did not weight populations based on education. So it turned out later on, after the election was over, they found out that the biggest reason for people voting for Trump versus Hillary Clinton was education level. So people who had college degrees happened to vote Democrat, and people who didn't have college degrees, who were less educated, tended to vote for Trump. So that is something that they waited for. Weighted as in WEIGHTED. They did that in the 2018 elections. 2018 elections, the midterm elections, the polls were actually quite accurate. This time the polls were pretty okay, but they did get the margins wrong. And the way to fix that is through learning more about data. Right.
Anne is saying polls are imperfect. There's no magic ball to make these predictions. Yes, they are not perfect, but again, they are the best we have, right?
It's like democracy.
Jim is saying, I gotta admit that the early on November 3rd, I thought the polls were really off. I was worried, but once the mail-in votes came in, things shortchanged. Yeah, it got closer to what the polls were showing. Anyways, I really do want to know.
Mirage. We knew that was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the Bernie video. I mean, but he
Yeah.
wasn't the only one. This is weeks ahead of time. The moment that Trump started talking about mail-in ballots, he did that, and he started fear-mongering about mail-in ballots, which have been used for ages, and they're actually the only way to vote in, I think, 5 states. He started drumming up this paranoia about them because he knew this is exactly what's going to happen. It's COVID. People are not going to want to come out and vote. Democrats are going to encourage people to vote by mail, which is probably why you had such a huge turnout as well, because it's a lot easier to vote by mail. When people knew they had that option, they count the immediate election day votes first. So the first night you would see a big red sort of mirage. You'd be like, oh, wow, Trump's winning everything. And then over the coming days, Biden would make up those margins because the mail-in votes would come in, and then he could call it fraud. He's like, well, I was winning, and then later on all these other votes came in and they made them all up. So this was the moment he started drumming up this paranoia. Everybody was talking about the red mirage that you'd see on election night, and everybody was talking about the blue shift you'd see in the days after. Right?
Yes, not only people knew that the blue shift is going to happen, not only it was obvious that the blue shift is going to happen, it was also obvious that the reaction to it is going to be like they're going to claim fraud.
Exactly.
Like that was even the blue shift wasn't the only thing that was predicted. The reaction to the blue shift was also people are going to be like, oh, they're going to see the Trump supporters are going to see this. They're going to be like, oh my God, we're winning. And then the blue shift is going to happen and they're going to be crying fraud. Like that's how predictable they were, that people saw this coming.